That's right guys, not clickbait. Behind me is a set of legit, real 22B struts, and I found these suckers in a freaking junkyard. In today's video, I'm gonna walk you through the whole story, how I found these suckers, how I verified that these struts are legit 22B struts, and I'm gonna show you guys how they're actually selling for $10,000 new on some websites.
This is my little SubaruONLY shop. It's a DIY Subaru channel. It's a channel where all I do is Subaru builds and race Subaru vehicles in motorsport events. It's a DIY themed channel where I walk you guys through the steps to get your Subarus back on the road and hopefully do a little racing of your own. So thanks for checking out the video, guys. I really appreciate it.
Okay guys, so let's dive into the backstory and how I found these struts at a local junkyard. I was actually streaming live about 6 or 7 weeks ago when I found these struts. And when I was streaming live, I actually didn't know that these are 22B struts. I was actually focused on the sway bars because I actually found a set of early white line sway bars on a GF wagon.
Yep, this is the one, guys. This is the one where I found those 22B struts on. This is a 96 GF wagon.
And it had early white line sway bars in the front and the rear of the suspension. I was totally focused on those sway bars because they stood out and they actually had a different colored paint. What I didn't notice was that those struts were not OEM struts, or at least not OEM for that GF wagon. And there's actually a whole secondary backstory on how I figured out that these struts were actually Bilstein 22B struts. So here's what happened. I was there live streaming on that Friday, and I thought I was going to take those sway bars and I had all the tools I needed, but what turned out at the end of the day is I actually didn't have one of the right tools I needed. I didn't have a big enough breaker bar to get some of the big bolts out. And so I actually left those sway bar and all the end links because actually that sway bar had really cool custom end links that were designed by that early white line company. And so I didn't want to take just the sway bars and not take the end links because if somebody else came and took those end links, they would be screwed and it really wouldn't be no good for anybody because you needed to have those sway bars and those end links to make it work on that first gen Impreza body. So I actually left thinking that I would have a chance to come back first thing in the morning and get those suckers. And I came back first thing in the morning with a big breaker bar and all the right tools, an extra impact gun and everything. And lo and behold, somebody swooped down and snagged those awesome, rare white line sway bars. They took the front and the rear ones, they were gone. They actually didn't even take the end links though for the back because those are the ones that had the really tight bolts that I needed the breaker bar for. So they left the end links, they just took the sway bar in the back, they took the front sway bar, but the front sway bar is not as rare and hard to find because sway bars from newer WRXs will actually fit the front of these GC bodies. But the rear was the one I really wanted, and unfortunately the guy who took that rear sway bar, the guy or girl I guess, who took that rear sway bar, actually left the end links, so it's really gonna be no good for them in any way. I think it's a total waste, it's a shame. Nevertheless, I show up the next morning, find out my sway bars are gone, I'm kind of bummed. I look around, look closer. I actually left the car and kind of looked around to see if I could find any other cars in the area. Came back to the car, decided to just take a closer look at the suspension because I was like, I don't know, this guy put some dope ass sway bars on his car. Maybe those struts are actually some aftermarket struts and I just didn't know. I don't know, I just didn't have any idea, but I just had a gut instinct, maybe I should take a look at this car. So I went back to the car and I kind of wiped the carbon buildup or the brake dust buildup off the shock body and it was silver. And I was like, like powdered silver, powder coat silver. I was like, that doesn't make any sense. That's definitely not an OEM shock body. And then I wiped it a little further and I saw it said made in Germany. And I was like, made in Germany? Okay, that's odd. This is definitely not some cheap ass Chinese. This is definitely not OEM Japanese. Germany, as far as I knew, was Bilstein. So I wiped out the rest of the brake dust off the shock body and sure enough, I found the Bilstein little insignia. I found the part numbers and I did a little quick research on those part numbers, guys. And sure enough, it looked like these were 22B struts. The Bilstein collaboration struts that they actually did with ProDrive. So the backstory is for the 22B, Bilstein and ProDrive developed a strut shock spring combo for these 22Bs. And it looks like I had found the original Bilstein struts that went with those Bilstein strut ProDrive spring combos. And I was like, holy shit. So I pulled them off the car, paid them at the front. I think I ended up paying about 100 bucks for the whole set of 4. And you can return them if they end up being bad. So that's kind of a nice thing about buying at a junkyard is you can buy these suckers and you get a 30-day return policy. So if you take them home, take the springs off, you find out the struts have blown seals, you can actually take them back to the junkyard and they'll give you a full refund for every penny that you gave them, which is definitely a nice thing to do. It's kind of a backup on those struts. But I digress. So I basically take those struts, take them home, take those factory springs off. It actually had OEM GF wagon springs on them. which actually means that the struts weren't compressed as much, which is a good thing because it actually puts less pressure on those seals over the long term. At least that's my theory. So I take the springs off, disassemble the top hats, and sure enough, the struts have good compression in them. All 4 struts have great compression in them. And as I'm looking at these struts, I realize these struts don't look like OEM struts. The bodies of the struts and actually the main shaft of the struts are much, much thicker than the OEM Japanese Subaru struts. And I showed that in one of my live streams from about 5 or 6 weeks ago, where I talk about how the top of those struts are machined and they're actually a much, much wider diameter body in those struts. And the reason is because those struts are actually inverted shock designs. I didn't know that at the time. I actually don't know a whole lot about shock designs and shock theory and stuff like that. But it turns out from some of you guys, some of the comments I got and do a little bit more research into it, is that these 22B struts are actually an inverted shock design. So that's what these Bilstein struts are. They're an inverted design. And that's one of the reasons they have a much wider shock bite at the top there. I believe it's also one of the reasons you can actually unbolt them on the bottom and disassemble these shocks from the strut towers or the strut bodies. But I've actually never disassembled the set before. So it turned out that all the struts were good, and I basically took those coils off and set those coils aside. And what I've done is I've actually used a set of H&R coils that I got off a 2001 2.5 RS. These H&R coils have a little bit lowered ride height, and they have a little bit stiffer spring rate than the OEM coils. But unfortunately, they also have a little bit stiffer spring rate than the 22B original ProDrive coils as well. Well, I couldn't find the original ProDrive coils, at least not locally. I did find them online on eBay, and I'll pop up that little screenshot in this video as well. And you can actually buy the original ProDrive coils that went with these Bilstein struts on the 22B for about $2,000. Now, how much these suckers go new? I did a little research there, and yes, guys, new old stock strut spring combos are actually going for $10,000 new for the whole set. That's new old stock inventory, original ProDrive springs with these Bilstein struts, about $10,000, guys. That's how much this stuff goes for. Crazy. Totally crazy. But I will mention that I did see that there's actually a group buy from one little Facebook group out there. And I think there are some people that are working with Eibach to have these springs remade with the similar spring rates that the original ProDrive springs had for these 22Bs. But for right now, I'm going to use these H&R springs. These H&R springs are really nice because they're actually a little bit stiffer, a little bit lower, but they're not too stiff. They're not really stiff like some of the stiffer ones out there. They're kind of on the lower range of stiffness. But let's take a closer look at these suckers and these springs I'm going to use in them. Okay, the springs you're looking at are actually a set of H&R springs. Let me go ahead and see if I can get one of the part numbers here on one of them. But what you'll notice is these are actually progressive rate springs, which means that there's actually a tighter wind down here on the bottom than there is at the upper portion of the spring. It actually allows you to have a spring rate that crosses a range of spring rates when the shock gets compressed. So there's actually the H&R insignia right there, DS, and there's actually the part number for these rear springs right there, 29472HA. Sorry for being upside down, that's just the way they're installed correctly. And then you go ahead and move over here to the front struts. Okay, get these suckers out here. What are the spring numbers for these front springs? These are the front H&R springs, 29472VA. So those are the H&R springs, and I actually looked up these H&R springs, and I've actually compared the spring rates on these H&R springs to the original ProDrive springs. And I'll tell you guys, I'll throw that chart up if I can find it. The original ProDrive springs are actually pretty soft springs compared to modern spring rates. So these spring rates are actually a little bit stiffer than those ProDrive spring rates, but they're relatively soft compared to all the springs that are available on the market today. I would say these H&R springs are pretty much one of the softest springs you can get on the market today. And because they have that dual coil design or that progressive coil design, they actually give you a wider range of spring rates as well. So they're a really nice combination for these Bilstein struts, I think. There's actually one more thing to talk about here, and that is the top hats. For the fronts, I'm actually using a set of Group N top hats. That's what they look like here. These Group N top hats have a much stiffer rubber compound, but they're definitely nowhere near as stiff as kind of a metal coilover spring design. So they're somewhere in between. They're kind of a compromise between having that real soft OEM rubber and that real stiff, completely solid metal contact, which is way too stiff for me. I definitely like having a little bit of cushion in my top hats. And then for the rears, these rear top hats are just the OEM top hats. So I'm not using the Group N top hats for the rear, just the original OEM top hats are in good condition with no damage. So that's my set of 22B struts that I found in the Junkyard, guys. And as far as the plans for the future, these 22B struts are going to be going in my 1998 RS. And I plan on using this strut spring combo for a bunch of different track day events that I'll be using my 1998 RS Coupe in. which incidentally should have my EJ207 in it as well. And I definitely hope you guys will join me for those first track day events in that 98 RS. Alright guys, I'm going to wrap this video up here for today. Thank you so much for checking out the video. Remember guys, check out SubaruONLY.com if you need factory service manuals or if you want to pick up some new shirts. I actually designed this shirt right here that I'm wearing, the SubaruONLY Motorsport shirt. So thanks so much for checking out the video guys. Make sure you check out my SubaruONLY.com website, check out the Teespring t-shirt line, and if you need parts for your Subaru, make sure you check out my SubaruONLY Amazon shop as well. Thanks so much for checking out the video, guys. I really appreciate it. My name's Luke. You guys are watching the SubaruONLY channel. Until next time, guys. Later! And then you go ahead and move over here to the front struts. Let me see if I can grab, oh! Had these kind of delicately sitting on a socket to hold in place. Nice. Okay.